this thing on?
That microphone's right in the front of the screen. You're the
No, you didn't answer my question. Would you want to be involved in this?
Yeah.
Crazy, wacky.
But yeah, no, we seem to be good. Do you want to sit in Bill's spot and say like a little speech?
Me?
Like a color regulation.
Yeah.
The moment you join.
I don't know what to say.
What could you not say? You know what I mean?
I have nothing to do with this meeting. I put the camera up. I don't know what they're
We're talking about the importance
Yeah,
of
like-
mono, my good
Okay,
friend.
one time I was wearing my
Where'd you go,
bright ass orange sweatpants and Allie clowned me so hard.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on, because
I want the
wait,
Windex friend.
did I actually
I
clown
want
you or
the
did you
Windex
perceive it
franchise.
as
No,
clown?
you did, because you said, yeah, Bella
It's
had
a
a
whole.
bright
They're
ass
gonna have a tanker truck drive in every week.
I was like,
Okay, that was
what
clown.
did I do?
Every single week we can douse them all. We can douse them all.
I
with
Exactly,
did.
gas.
you did the
The
thing.
sque- just
There
the
were these,
squeegees
like,
alone.
bright orange
You can keep the
sweatpants I
squeegee
used for my
company in
Clorox
business.
costume.
Oh yeah, I remember you showed me.
And I was using them to like.
I love the glass, but there's too much glass. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's so
and
so good.
it becomes a question when you're
Got
doing
that
a class. You
QuickTime
guys already
movie
done
ready?
classes in here.
Okay.
I have not
Steve
done
Harvey.
that. The distraction.
The Steve Harvey's impeccable.
I don't know.
Oh, it's a
Photos
Foley,
what does it.
people bouncing around, everyone's doing
That
stuff.
photo is like
Well, that's kind of
dangerous
that
for me
people are
because
actually.
Oh, it's
I
great.
love
Having
doing
three
stuff.
studios really frees things up and allows us the opportunity that like people during like typical class times can like actually manage multiple audio projects at one time in the studio versus like us all sharing the same room.
Well, now, to be fair, there always used to be 3 rooms where you could work.
That's true.
Always.
I think people just didn't know about like the
People didn't know about C.
108. Yeah.
I have a very important.
And they didn't want to go in the
Where did
little.
you get these?
Let's see
Those
what's
are
right
my
here.
pajama
Going right there.
Okay,
One,
they're just
one in
pajama
the hallway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought they were
They didn't know
actual,
about that.
like,
I had a class in there once. I
pants
taught
that
it.
were just
Pajamas.
that, and I was
When Gary
yeah,
left,
they're jammed.
Gary was gone.
They're my jeans.
That was 2 weeks notice before that. And Tori called me, will you do the audio 1 class for non-majors? And I said, I don't want to do
didn't
that.
say
You
jam.
just die.
But I did that, and I was in that
Or did
room.
you get a different orange?
No, it's a different mustache.
No, we
The
just moved
structural
them
ones
today.
are-
Was this everybody you think? What do you think?
I think we'll get like a couple of people because there's AS officers that want to be here that are cleaning up from the pizza meeting.
Well,
And I
please
think it'd be
do.
good to start
The
now.
general aren't very-
Just get right into it.
Look at all these.
I don't even
Look at all
pretend to
these
know
patch
why. I just
kids.
kind of put them up. I think.
But enough about patch
stuff.
kids.
That's all right. Well, we can, but whenever any,
I don't know if we're having a monitor up there.
I just, Brandon called and asked if I would talk about mono,
The importance of
the
mono.
importance of mono, and this is not really so much a survey of mono recordings as much as the idea that mono is the foundation. You know, I mean, if you allow yourself to get distracted too early with all of this stuff, you know, I think it's going to do you a disservice. I don't mean that it's no good, and I'm not saying mono's better. It's just that, you know, you don't want to learn how to, you know, put wallpaper on before you know how to build the wall. I mean, this is really what I'm getting at here. Now, for those of us of a certain age in the business, and I'm actually 10 years older in the business than I am in real life, but this was a natural progression. And the reason I talk about this to those of you who are receptive to it is that this is a long continuum for somebody like me, and you almost forget what you sort of absorb along the way. And it's like a lot of endeavors that you do in life. If you come in late to the party, it's not necessarily bad, but then you don't really understand how you got there and how best to use the tools that you have. And audio, my philosophy of it is, those of you who know me, is that I feel like we're all smart enough to just get it. And I think you need to get it in a very deep way so that it just happens. That's how I have mixed from the beginning, because that was really all you could do. And I was very lucky that I didn't have to worry about whether there was too much 400 hertz in this, because we had bass and treble, basically, is what we had. And we had one track. I didn't worry whether it was, where is it going to be panned, what's it going to do. Oh, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Bill Schulenberg. I'm the Central North America Vice President of Audio Engineering Society, and I have taught a few classes here and there over the last 25 years here at Webster. I miss the class I used to have. I used to know everybody, every audio student, because I was required. My audio aesthetics class was required, and we loved listening to records and movies and commercials, just talking about it. I recommend you guys do that to yourself. Listen to stuff and talk about it. You don't have to criticize it. Understand why it sounds the way it does, and what about the sound helps the message get across. I'm sorry to repeat myself for those of you who've heard me talk about stuff like this. But with music, I assume that's what we want to talk about here. This whole immersive thing is wonderful, and I'm not knocking it in any way, but if it's too easy to get distracted by all of this other stuff you can do, and you tend to do it before you really are ready to do it. I mean, I don't necessarily mean a quad mix, because we went through this almost exact same thing 50 years ago when quad was coming in. We built our control room and had the 4 speakers, and we had this giant console, and we'd sit down with the producer, and I'd put on this. At that time, still only had the 16-track tape, and I'd say, okay, here's this. Where do you want it to come out? And then we'd talk for 10 minutes about what speaker it was going to come out of. And then, of course, you get out into the world, and you had no idea where the sound was going to come from, because you had no idea what kind of speaker it was or what kind of setup they had. Nowadays, we do have an advantage in that most people who are going to listen to music in immersive formats are going to do it on their home theater system. So you can be pretty sure that they're going to have rear speakers and front speakers. So that's close. Whereas I would make quad records and they would have 4 speakers across the front. So that's a plus. And there are better ways to get those 4 channels delivered. However, they still all involve, and this is for me just as an old guy, too many algorithms for me. There's too much between me and the signal now.
It kind of interrupts your workflow a little
Well,
bit.
it's just too much. The sound is just not the right thing. I spoke about this to Casey a minute ago. I brought a tape, and I was saying, well, we could play the analog tape, and then I asked, is there DSP in the speakers? Well, so forget analog in here, because it all goes through the digital processing somehow. Not that that's bad. I'm not saying that's bad, but it's not analog.
Sure.
And that's another thing people forget. Because for me, the analog thing is kind of psychological. But what I was starting to shoot now, I was going to make the point. The real point is, if you make something that sounds good in mono, everything else is gravy. Everything else is just gravy. And if it doesn't sound good in mono, panning the guitar is not going to help it. That's been my experience. Nothing you can do. You might be able to distract somebody for a couple of bars when, oh my gosh, there's a guitar back there. But if the guitar solo is not what you want, and it's too loud or too soft or you can't hear it, forget everything else. There's so much talk on the internet and amongst the students and the people I talk to around the world. In my position as this in the society, it's amazing the people we get to talk to. Those of you who went to New York get the idea. It's just amazing, these people, and we're going to have quite a few of them come up to the summit. It's really great. But you talk to people who have incorporated this. It's infused into their lives, the way the thing, so it goes all the way to George Massenburg, whose secret to mixing is if it's too loud, turn it down. If it's too soft, turn it up. I mean, that's really it. So the mono mix, and also there's a lot of talk you see on the internet blogs. I'm skipping a lot of stuff because I am conscious of the time. You hear a lot of talk about translation. Everybody says, well, we have to have this DSP, so it'll translate to your car, so it'll translate to these speakers, so it'll translate to your headphones. Number one, I say, why does it need to sound the same everywhere? Because people who listen to headphones listen to everything on headphones. They know what things sound like on their headphones. That's step one. But number two, with stereo even, you don't know where somebody's sitting.
Like
And
if these speakers were set up in an unconventional way, it would ruin your stereo.
Or if you're in a restaurant, you happen to be sitting under the left speaker, the mix will be wrong. And to this day, if I'm mixing in surround, and I'll bet you, I'm going to show you what you probably will do here too when you're doing it. You're probably doing this. Am I in the right spot? Is this right?
I felt like that.
Right? And when Genelec came out to my house and they were trying to sell me one of these DSP systems, the guy says, well, it was Scott Esterson, who's a great guy, but he says, so don't put that on the internet. But he is a great guy. But he told me, now when you're mixing, where do you sit? Here, I'm right here. So he got his calibrated microphones and he put them right here, and they ran through all of their stuff that they do. Well, and sure enough, when they played the stuff back, it sounded different. It sounded great when I was sitting there. But as soon as I move, the room acoustics take over. No matter what you do here, it's going to build up back there because I'm on the short side of the wall. That's just the way it is. My recommendation to you is to take that all in and know it. Most people who are aware of audio, you walk into a room, you do this, you know what the room sounds like, and you're talking, you know what the room sounds
The
like.
old engineer clap.
The old engineer clap.
All the time.
Or you just talk and you get what's going on, and it's like putting on glasses, right? You put on glasses and you sort of know what it's supposed to be. Anyway, that's the whole thing. But mono is one of those things you give the tape out and it's mono. What we used to do up until where did my bag go? Oh,
It's right behind.
That's right. Look at this. You guys need to call your Webster Audio tote bags.
Ooh.
But and now a lot of times when I'm talking about mono, I'm not talking about stereo folded to mono. I'm not talking about two channels mixed together. I'm talking about one. Now, I'll let you cheat and have two speakers, but we make a mono mix. When we used to make up until the 80s. Now remember, stereo television didn't happen until 85 or 86. It didn't happen. You didn't hear stereo on television. You heard telephone line audio. and in fact, I was very excited. One time I had a record of mine that was played on one of the local TV stations, and we made a big deal to simulcast the right channel on an FM radio station, and the left channel was on the TV set, so you could. That's stupid, but that's it. So we were desperate for that. And in the early days of cable television, when you used cable TV antenna to feed your FM tuner, you had a nice stereo FM. Sometimes they would actually broadcast the television programs there. Well, my point is we never were working for stereo most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But that we didn't laugh it off. The idea was, and one of the things that I find today that bothers an old soul like me is that people just tend to say, well, we're just listening to it on MP3s, it's just on a little speaker, just whatever it takes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I want to show you is one of the very last mixes I remember that I made in mono, that was designed to be mono because it was never going to be heard any other way, and they wanted to be the best possible thing. Now I have a tape of it, but let's not bother because it takes too much time. But this is the one we want is the one at the bottom. The one at the bottom. Okay, wait a minute.
76 bill.
It's the 96-24 transfer of this tape here. I'm kind of glad I don't really want to put my tape on that machine anymore. But this is mixed in early '76. This is the exact thing you're going to hear. It's just there's reference tones on the front, so I balanced them all out. But this is a full track mono tape, which we don't have the full track tape machines, where it uses the whole width of the tape for one channel.
Mm-hmm.
You can't believe how good it sounds. I mean, when you hear the full track. Now this was played off of a 2-track, so I didn't even get the full effect off of this, because the real way to play this would be to have a mono machine that was picking up the magnetic modulation all across the width of the tape. But a 2-track has, if you look at the tape head, there's quite a bit of space between the two channels that's wasted. So this sounded even better then. But the point is, this particular song, it's a 1-minute thing that was written and recorded. They did the horns in Los Angeles, and I did the drums and the rhythm. And then we came back and mixed it here because this is St. Louis and this is for Anheuser-Busch. This is for the Cardinals. This was the song that was going to introduce every Cardinal game on the radio network, which was a big deal in the mid-'70s. Big deal. So I don't know how loud this is going to be. So
Hit space bar on that?
yeah. You tell me. It's 1976. But just one speaker, one thing. No automation, of course. You mix the thing. You help those things to parks. everybody took this as real showbiz.
Absolutely fantastic.
Isn't that cool? I mean, it's perfect for what it is, which is 1976, trying to be kind of hip. So when it went on the radio, play the second cut. There's open from the DAT. Next one.
Oh, this one?
No, that one.
There we go. Fantastic.
This is from a 7.5 tape from a DAT from 1990 when I made the transfer. Yeah, go ahead. But this is how it sounded. This is how it sounded every day before the Cardinal game.
St. Louis Cardinals Baseball is brought to you by Anheuser-Busch Incorporated, brewers of Busch, Budweiser, and Michelob.
We were really lucky to have Anheuser-Busch in town. They don't do this anymore.
Oh, man.
Busch, brewed with natural ingredients, natural carbonation, natural aging, to deliver a taste that's light and smooth. Busch, when you believe in what you're doing.
It's a real product of its era, but it's really endearing in that
Well, it
sense,
is,
you know?
but
Now, St. Louis Cardinals Baseball.
this is almost 50 years old. What would we do with all of our equipment that would make that sound better? I mean, it would sound different. I'm not, but I'm talking about strictly. It's a recording I'm proud of. It's a mix I'm proud of. I'm happy to listen to it. Yeah.
It's the only mix that I've listened to in this room that when I walk around, there's not a sudden buildup or removal or anything, so I really don't know. Like, usually there's a huge buildup of sub back there, and it was completely even no matter where I walked, so.
Well,
I don't
it's
know.
part of the magic of mono and of trying to get it right the first time. Now, this doesn't have that low sub bass that you would put in today, that a lot of people would put in today. However, remember, I mean, even though this goes against my philosophy of really trying to mix specifically for a medium, this was AM radio in people's cars before the ball game. This is KMOX AM before they had the simulcast. This is just, the range of the thing is like, what, 300 to, 3,500 is
Yeah,
all
sure.
that you heard on the radio.
And people want to hear those bright,
And we had that now. I don't hear that. I remember that hat is coming through real well. I don't hear that as well anymore. But I'm assuming that was okay here because that's why I have reference tones. I don't worry about playing a tape and say, geez, is that as sharp as it should be? I don't worry about that because the tone tells me it's just the way I recorded it. Mm-hmm. So, and when we mixed something like that, you'd play the tape. This one I believe was old enough. This would be 16 track. We got the 24 track in the late 76. So this is probably 16 track. But you're not distracted with all the stuff that isn't going to matter. And again, it would be great. If I had the tape back and mix it today, it'd be wonderful. No question about it. I'm not saying that this is better than stereo. But I'm saying is when you listen to that, you didn't say, man, that's no good, it's not stereo. It didn't cross your mind, I hope. And that stuff is why I would really recommend to you that you try messing with it for a while. And don't get distracted by all that stuff. Now, for example, when we put out promotional records, did head east here. This is a promotional copy, not for sale. Stereo's red, mono's bright. Mono's the black, and it's the same song. This is the edited version of a song off the record. But this way you could control what was going to happen. I didn't even trust radio stations to play stereo. If they were not a stereo station, we would make separate mono mixes for them. Because for the same reason I said earlier, years ago we had a client called CMC Stereo Centers, and they sold aftermarket stereos. You still see their buildings all over town, and now they're all dentist offices and stuff like that. And at the end of every commercial, we had a little mnemonic, and it went, CMC, the stereo center. Whenever I would listen to a mono radio station, I would say at least 60% of the time I'd just hear C, aerial, enter. You wouldn't hear, they would just play the left channel. Because mono stations didn't know how to play stereo. You could send a record, because they knew how to play records in stereo, because by that time they were compatible. Remember, we didn't even put out stereo records we didn't stop putting out mono records until the mid-70s, because they were not compatible. There was too much vertical motion in the stylus pad. So that's and another thing, you look at some of the popular. Who's somebody?
Oh,
I'm just trying to say so
Yeah.
much. The time is clicking
And there's
away.
a lot of good information.
I
for
just want to
people.
talk about it.
yeah. I just had a question about. So you were saying how stereo wasn't widely popular for like on a consumer level until like the mid 70s, 80s, right?
No. People were buying records in the early 70s,
Mm-hmm.
and then the 8-track car stereo really popularized that
Gotcha.
because cassettes were dictating machines. Cassettes come after 8-tracks in the evolutionary continuum. The 8-track, in fact, I remember I had a little Porsche 914 and it had an 8-track tape player in it. And the first time I put in an 8-track tape, and it was Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and it had this real stereo thing. And it was amazing because you heard stereo in the car, you couldn't believe it. But now I don't miss that because for the same reason, you don't know where you are in the mix. Mono doesn't bother me. If you listen to satellite radio or most streaming, they sort of reduce the separation anyway to lower the data rate.
So, like in the early inception of stereo, was I was just kind of thinking about like why some like early kind of '60s mixes are like for like listening to them in headphones, it's like the panning is like offensive to me. With,
I'm
like,
glad
the
you
stereo
tell me.
mixing.
I'm glad you made that statement.
Yeah. So
because
is that
this
like an
is
experiment or something
No,
at the time, or
no. These records were never made to be in stereo. They were never intended to be stereo. Perfect example is when Jeff Emmerich was here. I spent a couple days with him. He came and spoke to us, and I got assigned to drive him around, and I got to spend a lot of time with him. I had a whole bunch of things for him to sign. I had my pristine 1967 stereo Sgt. Pepper that I used to listen to, which was just like you're saying, it's weird. And then I bought a brand new one for him to sign that I could frame and put on the wall that would be pristine. I bought that at Amoeba in Hollywood, and it even said on the back, mastered from digital sources, which means somebody took the 1989 CD and just made the record. I never listened to it because he even turned up his nose when he did. He said, "Sure, want me to sign this?" I said, "It's just for the wall." But anyway, then I was almost embarrassed because I had a mono copy of Sgt. Pepper. That was the one I used to give out to friends because it's mono, and so it looks like a truck had run over it because people had beaten it up. So
Really
I hand
wasn't
him
about
this
blending
thing.
out music.
I hand him this thing, and he lights up, and he says, "Oh, this is the record." Now, if you've ever listened to the mono, forget the new stuff, but not that the new stuff's bad, but just forget that for the time being. He told me that this record, all the Beatles plus Jeff and George Martin and the assistant, I can't remember who gets the credit. They were there for 10 or 12 days mixing the 4 tracks to get this sound, and flying in live sound effects because they couldn't synchronize other tracks. They would just say, "Okay, we're going to get ready to make this fade into the other thing. Start the crowd noise." They hit the crowd noise, and then they fade it up, and it's all performed live. And he said, "Well, then, months later, word came down from the record company to make a stereo version." And he says he and George Martin knocked this out in a weekend, knocked the stereo one out in a weekend. So when students tell me, what's the deal with the voice on the right and the reverb on the left? What's the deal with that? And I'll say, nobody wanted that. Understand, nobody wanted that.
yeah.
And the other thing, and this goes to another topic that's dear to my heart, is vinyl. See, vinyl doesn't have the channel separation. If you play a stereo Beatles record that does that on headphones, it won't be the same because it doesn't completely turn off one ear. But your CD does. When it's on the right, it's on the right, and it's blank here. Drives you nuts.
It's just frustrating because like a lot of those versions are like the default on a lot of like streaming platforms.
That's
and
the
I'm
other
like,
reason
oh,
that's the other reason for me on streaming. I almost gave up because I'd been ripping CDs into iTunes for years, since 2001 or 2. And when they came out with iTunes Match, I thought, well, this is great. I guess a good way to get all my stuff higher sample rate, data rate. And I was just about to click the button saying replace all my stuff, then I suddenly realized, holy shit, now I don't want to do this because, for example, my Michael Jackson Thriller rip is from 1985, and that doesn't sound at all the same as what they play today. Not at all. I mean, mean, it's almost laughable. If you go to Walmart and buy a Thriller CD now, or you listen to it on streaming, it is nowhere close. And I have a promotional vinyl copy that is amazing. But to get back to what I was saying, vinyl it's just flat not as good. That's period. That's what it is. Is that it actually takes that stereo and does. They didn't worry about it as much because it never really was going to be hard right on anybody's stereo system. If you look at even the specs for vinyl, they don't tell you that they get any more than 30 dB of separation at the middle frequencies. And the highs, it's gone. So you're just getting the minor stereo separation. That doesn't mean vinyl doesn't sound great. This is the argument that I have with a lot of people. I'm not saying vinyl's no good. It's just, if you like vinyl and want to use it, sorry, a brand new picture of my grandson in the NICU. There you go, see, so there you go. I'll turn that off. But it's a wonderful experience, and I'll be talking about this, and Buster and I'll be talking about it, I'm sure, when we talk about analog in general. If people tell me they love playing records, they love holding them, and the whole experience of you're much more engaged in the playback, all this stuff is true, and I love that. But don't tell me it's better, because I spent 25 years of my life trying to make the records sound as good as the tapes, and it can't be done. It just can't be done. They sound great, but they don't sound like the tapes. And anybody who tells you that they do is nuts. And another thing I was going to tell you, now this record really it got destroyed in the water. But I want to show you that this exists. I'm sure you might have heard of this. Mercury Records had a series called Living Presence. One U-47 hung over the orchestra. They would find a place for it and put it.
A singular mic.
Single mic.
For a whole orchestra.
For a whole orchestra. Well, actually, that's the best way to use a single mic. I don't think I even have the vinyl in here anymore. Oh, yeah, I do. So it might play, but I wouldn't play it here. But I had to show you that this exists. There was a big thing for many years, recording with one microphone. And
so really the idea of mono is almost the idea of like minimalism versus maximalism.
Well, I mean, it's the foundation.
Yeah.
It's the foundation. I'm trying to find, there's another.
Black and white versus Technicolor.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's true. And of course, this is, so if you can get a hold of one of these, you want to do that.
That's the one. The Beatles in mono. That's.
But now I talked to Ken Scott, and he did acknowledge that some of the songs on the White Album were recorded with stereo in mind, because by that time they had gotten to 8-track.
Yeah. Do you remember which ones?
No, I don't. I didn't.
Okay.
He didn't go that far. He wouldn't tell me.
There are some tracks on the White Album that I know, like, there was no way that this wasn't mono. Like Your Blues, where that's like the worst example, where drums are one side bass.
Yeah. So then that means it was intended to be mono.
Yeah, but then there are some where it's like, oh, this
That's
sounds
right. Once,
normal-ish.
because when we got the 16-track machine in '72, late '71, I did the first 16-track session in St. Louis New Year's Day of 1972. And I remember when we got this machine, it was like getting a stereo 8-track. That's literally what I said to them. But what was I going to say?
You want to give us some closing thoughts?
Oh, closing thoughts. I was going to say, I'm looking for it. It's in here. As recently, John Mellencamp made a record that I used to play in the aesthetics class. This is called No Better Than This, recorded with one microphone. Yeah. Some of the songs were recorded at Sun Studios, just with one microphone, and some were recorded in the hotel room where, famous people recorded. I don't know. And this sounds really good, and you'd say to yourself, well, what's wrong with this? This is one microphone, and the musicians, you feel them step in to play their solo, and they step back and do that. This is what you did. Now, you understand, I'm not advocating that everything's bad now. I'm just saying that you will be doing yourself a favor in the long run if you get a feel for this. My advice to mixers, I read all the blogs you do. The 8 mistakes you're making, this will destroy your mix, all this crap. I say, when you're working on, because you can do this now when you have time. You don't feel like you have time, but you have time. Every time you're finished with your project you're working on, and you turn off the machine, save it somewhere, and then start from scratch next time. I mean, from a mix standpoint. Build up your mix every time. The problem I see is that people who don't do that don't get the experience of getting a decent mix automatically. Old school people, every time you put on a new song, you had to make 2 mixes that were okay. You had to make one for the monitors and one for the musicians. Every time, every song. You go to another song on the tape, you start from zero and do it. So as a result, you make thousands of mixes, and you get a sense for how things go together to work. Now, maybe not all 1,000 of them aren't great, but you need to get 1,000 acceptable ones very quickly. And I really think that this whole subconscious mixing thing is the answer. I mean, I'm not sure it works for everybody. That's what worked for me. I was very lucky that I got a chance to, I mean, for crying out loud, we had one of the very first 550 equalizers before it was a 550A. Well, these are A's, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I have at home. But the old 550s were missing that extra frequency down there.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like, it opened up a whole new world for me because I could take 400 hertz out. We had a big classical type studio. And at that time, in the early 70s, everybody wanted to think, or late 60s, everything wanted to get closer, like in LA, everything. And a room like ours was a disadvantage. Now it's going back the other way. You want a big live room that does this. Now ours was bigger than this. Because we would have the whole symphony in there. But but I wanted that tight LA sound, so I'm draping blankets, I'm doing all that stuff. I'm hanging panels on the wall, hanging blankets, anything I could do to tighten it up. And then I found out that for reasons unknown to me, either I figured it out or I just happened to luck into it, I realized that turning 400 hertz and putting a little dip in there made everything sound a little closer, and presto, I was the guy to make the records. And it worked out very well because we were the only place to do it, which, that's not, I had the job for many years, not because I was that great, but I was,
I think you don't give yourself enough
well,
credit.
I appreciate that.
I think you've brought in the past,
Well,
and even today, some really, really quality mixes. But overall, I think the importance of something like mono is just the idea of building the foundation of what you're working with and getting that the idea that you can kind of walk before you're running and adding all this extra stuff.
And it can be, it's amazing how it'll fool everybody too. I mean, as I say, when I played that first thing, nobody said, wait a minute, that's not stereo. Now you would know in headphones, okay, you guys would know, but the public doesn't know. All they know is the mix sounds right. That's all they know. Mm-hmm. And there's just so much you can do just with that. You worry about the blend, and when you're mixing the old way, you're trying to actually play it. I do have another Bush song, but it's long. If anybody wants to go, they can go. But it was designed for a more general release. But again, people talk about glue. Forget compression, forget all that. Yes?
The officers really gotta head out.
Yeah, get up. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your consideration. Anybody wants to go? Anybody wants to stay? I love to sit here for another.
Yeah.
But
Can you play the song?
I will play that. That's a
Because that might be
CD.
only non-
It's going to be
non-officer.
Loaded up.
cut 6, and this is not a super. Bye-bye. Good to see you.
Thank you.
If anybody ever needs any help from me, I'm here. What the heck? Anyway, this is also for a bicentennial beer jingle. This is the full version, not the 60-second version. And this is the same deal, but this tape